fast ship comes out of deep space and approaches an isolated moon base, coming down and landing in its landing area. A determined figure wearing a breath mask enters through the airlock and moves quickly into the corridor. Coming into the darkened hallway, he encounters another figure who activates a lightsaber, and they briefly fight before the masked figure cuts him down. He then goes on searching and encounters a commando who then fires his laser rifle at him. He deflects them all with his lightsaber and then charges after him. He continues retreating and occasionally firing, but eventually reaches a sealed door and has to make a stand firing back, but he is not able to hit him once. The masked figure charges forward and strikes the barrel off of his gun, and then in the next sweep cuts off his head. The head within its helmet falls and clatters over the floor until it comes to rest in a corner. The masked figure is still breathing hard and then deactivates his saber and puts it away. He walks to the helmet and collects it, carrying it away as he makes his way back to his ship. Going unopposed, he climbs back aboard and tosses the helmet back behind him, where there are half a dozen similar helmets in a pile. Once he is in his ship, he removes the breath mask, and Anakin receives word from AR about the communication from Obi-Wan. Anakin watches a message from Obi-Wan telling him they need him on Alderaan, and he tells AR to send a message in reply that he had to take care of a little problem first, but is now on his way. AR acknowledges, and Anakin then takes off in his craft. At night, a military force of clone troopers approaches the surface of Alderaan, with Captain Kenobi shouting out some last instructions to his soldiers as the troop transport approaches its landing position. Obi-Wan gives instructions to the pilot and keeps an eye outside, but apart from the light cast from a passing spotlight glaring from one of the transports, he can see little. As the doors of the craft open wide, clone troopers flow out across the surface, facing a force of battle droids, mostly cutting them down with their new weapons. The droid army inadequately defends their turf, only getting a few hits on the troopers with their plasma rifles, many of which only deflect off their armor suits. Kenobi watches the progress of the troopers from his base position near the front line. Ahead is another village that had been occupied and which is flying the Federation banner, but as the troops move forward and enter, soon it is replaced by the Republic banner. Anakin lands and meets up with Kenobi as he tells him they are ready to move in to prevent lawlessness as the clone troopers move ahead to the next village. Kenobi asks him about his business, and receiving an evasive answer then says he wishes Anakin wouldn't always be so mysterious, but tells him he's glad to have him here. Kenobi directs the supporting force forward, and they see the devastation left in the wake of the fighting, especially when the lightning flashes. They see battle droids blown to pieces, and only occasionally a fallen clone trooper. They make their way into the village to scores of thankful inhabitants. As Anakin makes his way through them to assure order, to help establish guardian troopers there, and take out any last remnants of resistance. Then a few of them indicate to Anakin the family who sympathized with the Federation and worked with them to maintain control and send their children off into slavery. Anakin moves to this house and the man there begs for mercy, given that he had done it all for the sake of his family. Anakin looks expressionless, then raises his lightsaber and cuts short a terror-filled scream. Anakin then sets the house on fire, steps out of the burning building, and tells them that they haven't anything more to worry about from them. They cheer him and people praise them, and they revere the Jedi almost as though they were gods. Then Anakin goes off back to his ship looking supremely confident, and begins speaking to AR. Then he suddenly begins to feel differently, and starts to stroke his forehead. AR questions him, but he says he is just going to take a walk. He walks off into the woods to the edge of a lake, looks up into the sky, then he screams and flops down at the shore, washing water over his face. He then hears the voice of his mother, and he looks up, calling to his mother. He sees her apparition before him, standing on the water, yet casting no reflection upon the ripples. She asks him, "Ani, what have you done?" He says he has to act for the sake of peace and the defense of the Republic. She asks concerning him, but he cannot explain how he feels at times, strong one minute and weak the next. She cautions him concerning his aggression. and he tells her that people expect him to be a winner, and expect him to succeed, and it's difficult, but he has to accomplish what he needs to. And then he rises up to go to her, stepping out into the water, but her apparition has vanished. The Republic force returns to Coruscant, and it is evident on their arrival that everyone is in jubilation, and receive the news that the Federation forces are no longer willing to fight, that they have sued for peace, and that the way to the Trade Federation capital of Thulu is clear. They are told that the Senate has assembled together a group to go to secure the surrender of the Trade Federation, and to detain General Grievous. Padme greets Anakin, and they go off together. Obi-Wan then goes and meets up with Dilithium, who tells him she sees him so little now, and he tells her that that will soon change. Padme and Anakin arrive at her apartment, and she breaks the news to him that she is pregnant with their first child. He is excited about the news. He tells her she ought to go home, but she reminds him she is no longer Queen of Naboo, but a senator in the Galactic Senate with far wider responsibilities, and she was asked to go on the mission to Thulu. Anakin says that he is going to go with her, and she says that he has other obligations with Obi-Wan, but he says he will ask him. They go to Obi-Wan, who says not only that he permits him to go, but that they will accompany them in Bay's ship. They prepare to leave, and Anakin and Padme proceed to a Republic pursuit ship, one of two standing by for the mission. Bay and TT join them at the ships. Anakin and Padme speak of how it all started on Naboo, and how long ago it all is, and the circumstances when they first met. She says, now look at the two of us, and he says, three of us, and they laugh together before they board their ships. Obi-Wan enters with Bay and TT, and tells them where they are headed, the Federation planet of Thulu, the political capital, where General Grievous resides, telling him that it is a planet in perpetual night. As they are speaking and Bay is getting the ship refueled and ready, they are cleared for takeoff. The three ships take off from Coruscant, and go off together to Thulu. The ships fly to the planet, descending down into the perpetual darkness and soar above the vast and bottomless ridges, making their way over the black mountain peaks to the isolated mountaintop residence of General Grievous. They approach, and the ships land on outdoor platforms which are connected to the city via slim walkways, a city which sits upon a few tall black crags of rock and connected by passageways. They emerge from their ships and are greeted by an envoy, a grim gray-skinned being called of Appear. And Kenobi tells him that they are the official delegation from the Republic, and they're to detain General Grievous, to take him back to Coruscant, so that they can officiate his surrender. Padme is chilled by the look of these pale and bloodless creatures, who eye her with a cold stare. The dark and solemn figure leads them into a waiting area, and already Padme feels naked with so few security men to protect them. Kenobi says this is all part of being a negotiator, getting used to those one must deal with face to face. While they are waiting, a man in blue robes with a silver visor about his head emerges. He tells them that he is General Grievous, and invites them for a meal in their dining area, before they retire. After they are gathered together in the dining area, the general speaks to them about the manner of the war, and the course of events that have led to the surrender. He regards it as perhaps inevitable that the Federation would find itself in this position, given the strength and agility of their clone army, but that the Federation had already committed itself. One of the serving girls makes subtle motions to Anakin, and then to Obi-Wan. Kenobi gets the hint and makes the excuse that he has to contact their ship if they are staying. Kenobi then gets up and meets the slave girl, whose name is Mundia. She tips him off that the man saying he is General Grievous was only yesterday Admiral Risor. Obi-Wan asks her who General Grievous is, and she tells him she cannot talk to him now, and must go before she is missed. He asks if they might meet with her, and she tells him where and when, and then goes. Obi-Wan then communicates with Bay that they're going to remain there for the time being. Bay says this planet gives him the creeps, and that he's going to remain in the ship. After Obi-Wan goes off, Appear comes out of the shadows. Kenobi returns to his seat, and the general asks him if everything is alright, and he says that their pilot has chosen to spend sleep period aboard his craft. So the general then says that he must make preparations for the rest of them to spend their sleep period here, and Mundia makes one final glance at them before the serving girls are herded from the room. The general says he is now a servant of the Republic and will provide the best of accommodations to their delegation, and he leaves. Padme asks Obi-Wan what that was all about, and he says that they had better not speak here. Mundia is in the slave quarters, and is getting herself out of bed to meet with Kenobi, but when she opens the door she is facing an expressionless Vapir. The girl is grabbed by one of the brusque guards, and the Vapir smiles with fanged teeth. Obi-Wan and Anakin are unaware of the girl's abduction, and remain waiting for her, where she said she would meet them. Anakin asks concerning the time and Obi-Wan says he checked, then questions whether the girl was merely flighty, and had nothing really to tell them, or was deceiving them, perhaps hoping for a payoff. But Anakin says that she was telling the truth, and certainly intended to return, saying something is wrong. So Obi-Wan asks where then she might be. Anakin then mentions that he might try to sense her mind. Obi-Wan asks if he can do that, and he says he might, it depends, and feels something, and runs off. They go into an area they had not seen before to a particular room, and when they enter the door there they find Mundia hanging by her arms with a tall white robot standing near her grasping a laser lash. It turns, and sees them and growls like some sort of monster. So they both ignite their lightsabers, and the robot uses his laser lash as a weapon against them, running at full power. They are unable to advance upon the robot with the slashing weapon striking in their direction. So the girl pushes herself off the wall, and swinging herself hits against the robot, knocking him down, and allowing Anakin to sever off its arm. It pushes the Jedi back, however, and rises, though he is confronted now by Obi-Wan's saber. The robot defends himself with a lance, but there is no contest and Obi-Wan strikes against him, driving his blade into the creature's vitals, and bringing about his end. While Obi-Wan investigates the fallen foe, Anakin brushes himself off and Obi-Wan asks him to help get Mundia down. Anakin reaches up to grab her, while Obi-Wan finds the release mechanism that lowers her down. Anakin asks if she's alright, and she says she is fine, and thanks them, telling Obi-Wan that their earlier conversation must have been overheard. He then asks about her, and Anakin detects a surveillance droid, and strikes it down. Mundia tells them that they have surveillance droids everywhere on this planet, and they think that General Grievous might still have a few tricks up his sleeves. Obi-Wan then asks her to tell them about General Grievous, and that she's sure that the man they met wasn't he. She says that she is certain, and Anakin asks where he might be then, that this is where his headquarters is. She says she is not sure, but there is an edifice where none of the servants are allowed to go, and which is perpetually guarded. And she has seen the officials enter and exit there, but she has never been inside. Anakin tells her to take them there, and Obi-Wan asks her to show them the way, and they leave the room. Padme is sleeping in her chamber, when a figure enters and approaches her. She is entirely unaware of its presence, as it makes its way to her, and moves over her bed towards her. Mundia leads them down passageways, and takes them to where the protected building is, and there they see the Guardian battle droids, outside the door. Obi-Wan says it's suspiciously like a bunker, and that General Grievous must have wished to conceal himself, and escape by sending someone else to Coruscant, in his place. Kenobi tells her to remain there, and keep an eye out for them, and hands her a communicator, and to let them know if she gets into any trouble. Anakin tells her to keep out of sight, and she moves into a small nook in the architecture. Anakin and Obi-Wan move ahead with QB down the corridor, and Anakin asks Obi-Wan about the general, and he replies that it would appear Grievous does not wish to be taken prisoner, and Anakin asks why. And he says they must ask him themselves, and hope they can get to him before he takes his own life. On Obi-Wan's signal, the two Jedi spring out and swiftly bring down the battle droids, with a few well-placed gashes with their saber blades. Within a few seconds all the battle droids lay in pieces across the floor. They approach the ornate door of the Supreme Commander of the Federation, the control room of General Grievous. Obi-Wan looks up at one of the robot cameras on either side of the door, and tells Grievous to surrender, and come out of the room unarmed, thinking it might be booby-trapped if they tried to enter. And there is no response apart from the sound of the door clicking. Padme then feels someone in the bed, and thinking it is Anakin turns, telling him she hasn't been able to get to sleep. Then looking she sees one of the Vapirs and screams. Obi-Wan asks Anakin what their next move should be. Anakin then approaches and reaches for the door panel. Telling him to be careful, Anakin replies he doesn't sense anything, and presses the controls, and the two heavy doors slide slowly apart, and they walk inside. Obi-Wan leads the way and they enter an empty room, with other rooms going off to either side, housing a vast computer network. They search through each room for Grievous, and Anakin calls out to General Grievous, and for him to come out. As Obi-Wan looks around, telling Anakin that he thinks that this is the General, this computer which regulates, and runs, and orders the entire Trade Federation, the mastermind behind their entire empire. He sees its thinking summarized in large charts of raw materials in, and profits out, amassed to secure even more raw materials, and more profit, and on it goes until it takes over the entire galaxy. Padme exits the bedroom and a number of other Vapirs are standing in the hallway outside. She attempts to flee from them but is cut off. They begin to move in slowly upon her and she has nowhere to run, and screams out for Anakin. Anakin asks what do they do with it now that they've found it, because they certainly cannot take this computer back to Coruscant with them, not unless it is in pieces. Obi-Wan says they ought to find out something about what is going on within the computer, and asks Kubi to connect himself up to one of the computer terminals to download information. The droid sends out a socket arm, and replies how much memory the computer has, and that he will be unable to access it easily, or to collect all its memory. So Obi-Wan tells him just to copy the most classified files, and work from there. Anakin then asks Obi-Wan why Grievous would have put up so many hindrances to them, and Obi-Wan suggests the computer was frightened. It was frightened of being found and accused of failure, or destroyed. And Anakin questions this but Obi-Wan says if the computer is able to read and control people's thoughts then it probably also has its own. The man they encountered was being controlled by this computer, which is why he made himself out to be General Grievous. And Anakin then says that the Silver Circlet was designed to control the humans. And Obi-Wan then realizes not only to control his thoughts, but to draw upon them, so that the other men of this city must all be utilized by the computer to amass their collected experience and knowledge to aid it in its decisions. Then they hear booms, and look at each other. Then an explosion hits so close that the entire room shakes, and some of it falls down. Anakin asks what this is, and he suggests someone is shelling the city. Small skimmers fly overhead piloted by clone pilots firing missiles at the entire city. Various sections of the mountaintop city are exploding. The Vapirs flee as the city is shaking from the explosions, and Padme collapses in the hallway. Obi-Wan communicates with Bay, who is already awake, and mentions to him that ships are bombing the city. Obi-Wan tells him that they'll move back to the ship, and he tells them to hurry. Obi-Wan says they have to get to the ship, and Anakin asks about Padme, and he tells him to fetch her, and meet at the ship, and he will collect Mundia. Obi-Wan and Anakin split up and Obi-Wan communicates with the captains of the other ships to collect together all the officials and servants from the city, and to get them aboard the two pursuit ships. Obi-Wan goes back, and tells Kubi to detach, and they immediately head out, and he goes back and finds Mundia hiding there, as the explosions are rumbling all around them. He tells her they are going to make their way back to their ship. She asks about all the others, and he says they're being loaded onto the other ships. Anakin arrives, and finds Padme, and she is crying, and he tells her they have to make it back to the ship, and make their way through the collapsing corridors. Bay is watching nervously the attack, as ship after ship descends, and he says fortunately they're attacking the fortress more than the landing platforms. Mundia leads Obi-Wan through one of the connecting tubes which will lead them back to their ship, and then Anakin and Padme arrive and go through. Bay then goes into the gunport and gives control of the ship to TT, just in case any ships head in their direction. Bay climbs into the top gunport and checks his scanners for the position of the bombers. Obi-Wan and Mundia arrive and board the ship. Anakin and Padme make their way through the passage, but Padme collapses, and Anakin lifts her and carries her the remaining way to the ship. Once all are on board they immediately launch and fly off for space, as the pursuit ships take off from their own platforms. Bay's ship is noticed as it launches and Bay begins firing at the bombing ships as they come after them. There are still others coming after them, which follow them up into the atmosphere and into space, firing on them the entire way. Bay leaves and comes down to the cockpit. Bay suggests that the fighters cannot follow him once they go into hyperspace. They see the two pursuit ships going into hyperspace, and say they're not the ones who were being pursued. And Obi-Wan asks why they would be firing upon them, and Bay tells him that they are not a registered Republic ship, remember. Then Bay says over the comm that they are a Republic ship, and they are hit by laser fire, and he says, I don't think they believe me. The orbiting dreadnoughts then move in on them. Bay asks if they ought to surrender, that they are taking quite a beating. Padme says they don't look in the mood to take prisoners, and Obi-Wan says that whoever sent that ship was unaware of their presence or their mission, then thinks perhaps they might be. They ask what he means, and he says that these fighters were attacking the city, suggesting they did so precisely because there was something there that they didn't wish us to find. That they accessed the computer and think it had something to do with access to General Grievous. Anakin says the computer memory, that's now partly held within QB, so Obi-Wan tells Bay they have to escape them or they'll confiscate QB. Anakin says there must be something they wish to be kept hidden. Bay says he can take them to his own planet, and they could make it there via Gangorian space, saying that they wouldn't dare follow them inside. Although Obi-Wan thinks that they would not wish to go there themselves, that the Gangorians are hostile to everyone, and do not like anyone entering their space, and those who do inevitably become guests at a feast where they are served as the main course. Bay asks if he has a preference, and they say to go in, and Bay pulls back on the controls, and the ship darts off into Gangorian space. They enter Gangorian space, and think they are in the clear, but are identified and pursued by forces from one of the planets there, and drawn in by a tractor beam, and are convinced now that they have had it. Obi-Wan says they're in deep trouble now, perhaps even worse off than they were before, but Bay says that they were about to lose their shields, and had already taken some damage. At least we could talk our way out of this. But they are taken aboard the monumental craft, and imagine there must be a way to use their official credentials, though they mean nothing here. And Anakin wonders if they must fight to the death, but Obi-Wan says if they might convince them of their circumstances, saying they have a pregnant woman on board. Bay says even he wouldn't bite that one. But then they say there is no reason to remain inside the ship, or they'll just cook the entire ship. So they exit, and are told they will be taken to the King of Berbears, and are led into the feasting room. They are brought in, and are forced to take a place before him, where their cooking fires are roaring. Anticipating that they will be butchered for trespassing in their space. Padme then steps forward, and makes appeals to the king, explaining their situation to them. The Berbear king says that they do not allow aliens to transgress their space, though he will permit no harm to come to them with such a distinguished person among them. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme all smile, and servants go with gifts to present to this most important person as they go to pay their honors to Bayok. They are startled to find that he is the honored one among them, and the Berbear king refers to him as the Prince of Alderaan. Bay then turns to them, and rather quietly admits that he is the Prince of Alderaan, and his name is Baylock Organa, the son of the king, Hight Organa. Bay then tells the Berbear king that he and his friends were on a very important mission for the Republic, and were simply passing through his space to avoid trouble on his way back to Alderaan. So the Berbear king offers them escort out of his space, and after saying farewell they go together back to their ship. Once on board and they have launched into space, Obi-Wan asks him precisely how a Prince of Alderaan was to be found freighting cargo as a merchant. Bay tells him that on Alderaan they don't permit their royalty to become detached from the ways of the galaxy, and so he became a merchant to work the spice routes and do other miscellaneous trade. It is required that any royalty cannot assume his role of ruler without spending several years off-planet seeing what things are truly like and making a way for himself without help. But that now he says that it's time he returned to his home world and flies them in his ship to Alderaan. The group spend a relaxed time upon Alderaan, enjoying everything the planet has to offer. They go about as Bay shows them all the important sights around the main city. They are relaxed and exhilarated, and engage in activities with one another. Then in the evening Bay goes out and finds Mundia sitting and looking at the stars, thanking him again for saving her, and he asks about her home world, and he then points the star out to her. They spend time together out beneath the stars, just the two of them. After an enjoyable stay there, Padme says that she loves the planet, but wishes now to return to their home on Korzuak, as she is expecting she should get back due to the arrival of their child. Bay says that he will take them there himself, and they are agreeable, although Mundia decides to remain on Alderaan. Bay flies them back to Korzuak, and lands his ship near their home. They invite him in where he spends the evening, telling them that he will return to Alderaan to take his place as co-regent with his father, and will be assigned as the new representative to the Galactic Senate. Then when he leaves, they say their farewells, and he offers TT to them as a house helper. He boards his ship and they wave to him, and watch as he takes off and flies up into the sky. The next morning Padme is working in the kitchen with TT helping her, and when Obi-Wan comes in he greets her, and mentions that he must get a shuttle back to Coruscant. But Anakin emerges and says he cannot go so soon, and he and Padme invite him to remain with them for a few days, which he agrees to do. That evening Obi-Wan and Anakin speak together, asking about his house, and he says he wanted something simple, not ostentatious or expensive, not too far from trade centers, but still far enough away to be peaceful. Saying the planet itself is fine enough, with the best weather one could ask for. They speak together, until Padme tells them that dinner is ready. They get together, and during the meal Anakin casually asks Obi-Wan about the dark side of the Force, how one would know if one is drawing from the dark side. And he tells him it depends upon what is driving you, whether you act from a sense of justice or revenge, of kindness or hate. But he asks if he is acting for the good of another and for justice, that the dark side would take hold. Obi-Wan tells him he cannot answer him from his own experience, although he has been influenced to succumb to it, as all Jedi are. Padme attempts to break the conversation into something more cheerful. Obi-Wan then asks if he has requested a dispensation from the Jedi Council, and Anakin says he hasn't, that there is far too much to do. He says, even though the Federation forces are overthrown there is still Lord Tyranus to deal with. And Obi-Wan cautions Anakin about thinking too much about Tyranus, since he was the one who killed his mother, and going after him could become an act of revenge against him. Anakin says, however, that if he had to confront Tyranus, he would not necessarily be driven to it by revenge. And Obi-Wan says this is so, but only that it will be much more difficult for him to master his feelings. Obi-Wan counsels him to leave the hunt for Tyranus up to others. Then Anakin says that sometimes he thinks he can hear his mother speaking to him, and Obi-Wan mentions that his mother was strong in the Force. That night Anakin begins to feel the influences in his mind, as though his mind is being taken over. He sits out alone, and tries to clear his mind, but he recalls the powers that entered him that made him strong. That night Obi-Wan is in his room working through the files to be downloaded from Grievous. Anakin enters, and tells him he has been sent on another mission by the Jedi Council, and has to leave, and this gives Padme and Obi-Wan a chance to speak together, since she considers that there is something Anakin is hiding from her. Obi-Wan says all spouses hide things from their partners, as she no doubt does too. And she admits that he has found her out and is quite right, but there's something deep inside him she simply fails to understand. So then Obi-Wan suggests that when Anakin returns they have a big celebration for him. Padme asks why, and Obi-Wan says that Anakin had not requested a dispensation from the Jedi Council, and so he put one in for him, and that the mission he is on will be his last for a while. And Padme throws her arms around him. Anakin meanwhile is in the very heart of a conflict, and he corners a number of Federation sympathizers who surrender to him, before he cuts them down. He looks at them with glee, before he comes and turns his head. A Republic commander enters, and congratulates him on his effectiveness. He wonders why they wouldn't have surrendered to him, but Anakin says there was nothing else for him to do, and walks off. Anakin arrives at his house, and when he enters everything is dark. He steps in, and everyone cheers at him with a big surprise, and Padme runs up and throws her arms around him, and Obi-Wan greets him, and welcomes him back. Anakin looks around at all his friends, who are gathered there, and asks what they are doing there. Obi-Wan tells him that they are welcoming him home, because the Jedi Council has granted him a dispensation due to the arrival of his child, and that he will be able to remain home with his wife, and not be involved in everything that's going on. Anakin looks hardly pleased. The spirit of the mood is broken, as Anakin walks off saying he has things to prepare. Padme looks upset, questioning Obi-Wan what might be wrong with him, but he says he will go in and see what is going on. Padme then walks over to the guests. Obi-Wan enters the bedroom and Anakin is busy changing, and tells him that he cannot be allowed to remain there, and that the Republic needs him and his skills as a Jedi, and that it's just not possible for him to give up just yet. He tells Obi-Wan that later, closer to the time when his child is to be born, then he will refrain, but not yet. Anakin then tells him that he has been given an important mission, one which simply cannot wait. He is going on a secret mission into the heart of the Separatists, and that he cannot go in the garb of a Jedi. Obi-Wan tells Anakin that he ought to take a break and recover. He is looking tired and overworked. Anakin says since the surrender of the Federation there has been much going on, but that his mission is designed to bring an end to the Separatist movement, then after he can take a break. Then he asks him if he cannot stay tonight and leave tomorrow, but he says he must leave at once. He just came back to say goodbye to Padme. But he tells him not to tell Padme that it is anything more than routine, and he agrees. Anakin finishes his change of clothes, and then puts on his mother's black hooded cape, saying that it's not traceable to the Republic, and besides is impervious to fire. Padme enters saying that she sent everyone home, and Obi-Wan tells Padme that Anakin has agreed to go on another mission and needs to leave at once. Then Obi-Wan leaves the room and Padme runs to him, and they hold one another. Later, Anakin goes out to his ship on the landing platform, and makes his final goodbyes to Padme and Obi-Wan, who walks with him while Padme and TT watch nearby. They walk slowly to his ship and then, out of sight of Padme, Anakin takes off his lightsaber, and says to Obi-Wan that he wishes him to hold on to it, and that if he doesn't come back to pass it on to his son, when he's old enough, should anything happen to him. Obi-Wan agrees that he will put it away in safekeeping, but he asks Anakin that when he does return from this mission to accept the dispensation. Anakin nods and then they embrace one another. Anakin then turns and boards his fighter as Obi-Wan grips the lightsaber, slipping it into his robe, and then joins Padme and TT by the house as they watch his ship blasting away. Obi-Wan puts his hand on the lightsaber and then tells Padme there has been a change of plan, and that he will remain with her until Anakin's return. Anakin speaks to AR to set the coordinates to take him on a circuitous path into Separatist space, and they enter in and land on the planet. But soon after he arrives he hears a public announcement that with the defeat of the Federation forces that Lord Tyranus seeks terms of surrender. Everyone cheers, while Anakin pays close attention as they show the masked Tyranus standing up and making his speech of capitulation. And then the announcement is made that the ceasefire is in effect, and the official surrender will occur on the planet Mustafar, on the frontier of Separatist space. While everyone else shows relief and joy, Anakin quickly returns to his ship, getting in and requesting clearance for launching. The crew there tell him that the war is over, repeating word about the surrender, but he says he wishes to leave at once. He launches, and then in space tells AR to set their course for Mustafar. Palpatine is on the convoy transporting the senator to Mustafar to secure the peace. Anakin, meanwhile, comes out of hyperspace above Mustafar, and steers his ship towards the Republic fleet gathered there. He is permitted to land and gets out and is greeted warmly, and with hugs and cheers, from his fellows. But after engaging in some forced small talk he asks where Palpatine is, and they tell him he is just about to shuttle down. Anakin arrives, and tells them that he has been given the duty of escorting him by the Jedi Council, but is told that they haven't received any word of this. So he uses a Jedi mind trick to get past them. He goes to the hangar bay where the shuttle is situated, and is able to sneak himself on board. Palpatine then enters, and is taken down to the planet, and then proceeds to an edifice within the heart of permanent lava flows. He enters into the palace with his bodyguard, and then across a long bridge over the lava to the entrance of the central chamber. He tells his guards to stand outside while he goes into the spacious hall. Entering, he sees a figure looking out the large windows at the lava flows outside. Turning, it is Lord Tyranus. Tyranus sees Palpatine and comes to him, bows to him, and calls him master, and Palpatine laughs. Anakin makes his way across the bridge to the edifice, and finds a way into the central chamber, and there he sees Palpatine, and Tyranus turns, and looks at him, recognizing Anakin. Anakin tells Tyranus that there is no point in wearing that mask, because one of us isn't going to leave here alive. Tyranus agrees, and removes the mask he is wearing, and beneath reveals himself to be Count Dooku. Dooku then tells Anakin that he notices that he didn't bring his lightsaber with him, and asks how he intends to fight him. Anakin then draws Tyranus's lightsaber to his hand, and throws it into the lava flow, saying no lightsabers. Then they engage in a battle of force powers, and begin the fierce confrontation. The contest ends with Anakin raising Tyranus off the ground. Palpatine, watching the entire confrontation, is delighted by the exhibition, and encourages Anakin, and he propels him out of a door, and over the lava, where his body bursts into flames and melts away before their eyes. Anakin feels satisfied, then seems to recover his senses, but Palpatine says, "You have done well, my apprentice." Anakin says that he cannot believe what he did, but Palpatine tells him he did the right thing, and asks him if he can feel the force flowing within him, and he answers he can. Palpatine says good, and laughs to himself. Anakin then walks across the room, and takes up the mask of Tyranus, looking at it for a moment, as Palpatine tells him that they will go together to celebrate the victory of the Republic, and to oversee the passage of the new charter in the Galactic Senate. Meanwhile on Kashyyyk, Obi-Wan and Padme hear of the peace treaty, and are pleased, and then Obi-Wan continues fishing around through QB's memory. Padme glances over and questions if this is still necessary now that the war is over, but Obi-Wan says that they still don't know who sent those clone troopers to destroy General Grievous. And as they continue going through the files, QB uncovers some holo transmissions between Lord Tyranus and another figure. He asks QB if he can display the actual holo file, and he tells him to present whatever he can. And when he watches the transmission he looks and says with a smile of recognition, "But that's Senator Palpatine." He cannot believe it, and thinks this must be something else, a secret attempt at peace negotiations. But he asks QB if he can clean up the audio track, and hears Palpatine speaking of their invasion plans. Obi-Wan is startled, and glances over his shoulder, telling QB not to tell anything of this to Padme. Seeing the holo projection, Padme approaches, and asks if they'd found anything, but he says that he will need to align QB's holo system before he can check the files. But then asks Padme if he might borrow TT to give him a ride into town, and she asks if it's urgent, and Obi-Wan says there's some business he must take care of. He tells QB to wait in his room until he returns. He tells her that TT will look after her and take her to the hospital if she needs it, and that he'll be back as quick as he can. Anakin travels within Palpatine's personal transport. telling him that he expects now that the war is over that Palpatine will no longer be ruler of the Republic military forces, but Palpatine says he wouldn't say that, since the peace charter permits the election of a figure to oversee the operations of the Empire, someone who can act more directly and not be hindered by specific planetary opposition, who would be able to quell uprisings and rebellions and act decisively in defense of the new Empire, and says that if he is elected to this office he would very much wish to see that Anakin would stand by his side. Palpatine goes into the Senate room with his Trade Federation allies around him, and taking his place at the table, proclaims that he has worked out the surrender deal with Lord Tyranus, in which all separatist planets and their territories would be reintegrated into the Republic, and the Imperial Charter, calling for the formation of a permanent army and military authority, including the establishment of a new elected office that would be able to act swiftly and decisively to deal with any threat to the new Empire, along with an expansion of their fleet so as to prevent any future invasions into their space, and to prevent the arising of another separatists movement. Palpatine is cheered, although afterwards some express views that there is no necessity to some of his measures, including the formation of an emperor, which they figure will not pass the Senate in any case. While at home, TT alerts Padme that the terms of the treaty have come in, and Padme now must go to cast her vote for ratification, but tells TT that she means to go there in person. TT asks and wonders about it, and she says that QB will remain in the house. Padme says the vote will happen soon, and they need to leave at once. TT pilots her personal transport, while Padme reads the terms of the treaty, but as she reads it she says it has very complicated provisions given the rather simple terms, a lot of things hidden within its wording beyond its general scope, saying that the Emperor can gain direct control over any planet's defense, including all resource and mineral rights, if ratified by the Military Council. Reading that it can be overthrown by a formal protest filed by the ruling body on any planet, and be handled through a council of arbitration. Padme is surprised to find this charter is less like a surrender agreement, and more like an entirely new constitution. Arguments are made on both sides, but they are surprisingly brief. General Tarkin rises in support of the Military Council, on the view that the new Empire needs to have time for wounds to heal, and to deal with the problem of organizing the new government. General Tarkin praises Palpatine for bringing the Republic together again, and expanding it, and establishing a stronger military presence to prevent another rift by the Separatists. Given the Federation incursions, this seems to be entirely justified to many. The Senate quickly ratifies the peace treaty, which incorporates back into the Republic the former Separatists and their territories. Very few believe that the ancillary provisions contained in the Imperial Charter will pass so easily. Voting continues on the Imperial Charter through the full Galactic Senate, though when the election tallies are counted it turns out that they have all passed, including affirming the election of Palpatine to the office of Supreme Head of the new Empire. As she watches the tally, Padme is shocked, wondering how this could have happened. Palpatine is then formally declared Emperor, and they leave the Senate room, with most of them congratulating him, although Padme's are rather muted. Bail Organa checks the results of the tally, saying that very few of the founding planets approved of the Empire, conveying to Padme that the establishment of the Empire incorporated not only the former states, but that the Charter included all of their territories. Padme concurs with this. And then Bail tells her that because of the provisions of the alliance between the Federation and the Separatists, the Federation Empire became a territory of the Separatists. Padme says that with Federation space incorporated into the Republic, it likewise gave their representatives equal voting power in the full Senate. They wonder if this was just an oversight, or whether it was done on purpose. They meet with some of the high-ranking senators, who argue that although the Federation was defeated that they now had a great deal to do with the election of Palpatine, saying that the Republic defeated them, but then they made Palpatine Emperor. Others argue that the Federation ought not be punished merely because of their defeat. While Tarkin says that Palpatine is just the sort of man they would wish to have in such a position, and says to Padme that coming from her own planet, that she must be glad of his election. So they say that Palpatine is now Emperor of this new Empire, and that the Senate must share power with the new Military Council, put in place to prevent future disruptions within the new Empire. and it is soon announced that this council will be headed up by General Tarkin, appointed to it by the new Emperor. The senators there seem to grow increasingly uneasy, and Padme then sees Anakin, and runs to him, and after greeting her tells her that she ought to be home. But Padme says she needed to be here for the vote, and tells him that she voted against the creation of the Empire, and is not at all pleased when she learns that one of the first planets the Emperor approves the mining of is Naboo, which he hands over to the very same managers of the Federation, who possessed it before. Padme wishes to stand against this, but Anakin defends the Emperor, saying he knows what he is doing, and does it for the good of the Empire. Palpatine then requests that Anakin might go with him on a mission for the new Empire, and he goes with him, saying goodbye to Padme, and reminding her to get back home, before walking off with Palpatine. Bail and Padme go together to commiserate, and she expresses to him that she is powerless now to protect her planet. He assures her that there are still provisions available to the local ruler to oppose specific activities of the Empire, but she says she is no longer Queen of Naboo, and such a process will take months. She knows what destruction the Federation machinery can do in mere weeks, for even now there are places on her planet still not recovered from their last invasion of it. Palpatine and Anakin return together to Mustafar, and there in his command room he inducts Anakin into the Sith, conferring to him his new Sith name, Lord Darth Vader. He also conveys to him a new, red lightsaber, telling him that with this weapon, that he will defend the Empire against all threats and enemies, and Vader concurs that he will serve the Empire and Emperor, and bows to him. Palpatine mentions the destruction of the fortress on Thulu, and Vader tells Palpatine that they acquired classified files from General Grievous. The Emperor asks where the information resides, and he answers within one of the Jedi Council's tech droids, being kept at his house. Palpatine tells Vader that the information contained within this Jedi droid creates a security risk for the new Empire, and that Anakin must go and destroy it. Vader answers yes, my master, bows, and goes off. He then gets aboard his fighter and launches, piloting it back to his home on Korzuak. At the Skywalker home Padme is back when Anakin arrives. Padme greets him, but he brushes her away, looking around for the droid. She at once notices his eyes, their fearsomeness, and he tells her he has not been sleeping well recently, and he's had a lot on his mind, and babbles a bit, still looking around the house. Anakin asks if Obi-Wan is there, and she tells him that he had to leave to get something for his droid. Then Anakin asks where is QB, and Padme tells him in Obi-Wan's room. Anakin charges in while Padme asks him what this is all about. Anakin opens the door and their QB turns to look at him. He approaches him, and then takes out his lightsaber, activating it, and bringing it down. Padme screams as the lightsaber slices right through the middle of the droid. Smoke pours out as Padme runs up to QB, asking Anakin why he did that. Anakin only says that it had to be done. He puts his lightsaber away, and she tells Anakin that Obi-Wan was searching through the data files on his droid, and he seemed to be so fond of it. Now what is he going to say to him when he comes back? And he repeats with some uncertainty that it had to be done. He looks around the room and seems to withdraw from it. He looks out of the window at the sun, and attempts to clear his eyes. Then he clenches his fist and closes the shade from the glare, and then throws a plant out of the window, and knocks down other things, before storming out of the room. Padme runs after him and Anakin tells her that she must not tell Obi-Wan that he did this. Padme then begins to cry at Anakin that of course she has to tell him what he's done. She then asks him to stay there, but he says he has to leave. She is now weeping and grabbing at his arms, pleading with him, screaming that Obi-Wan is his friend, asking him why he has turned against him, telling him that she will contact the Jedi Council. He looks at her with fever in his eyes, and reaches out his hand. She is immediately gripped by a faint and falls lifeless to the floor. Obi-Wan, meanwhile, has taken a shuttle to Coruscant, and he and Windu are there watching the hologram that he found in the files of General Grievous. He is shocked, but says that there is little they can do. A member of the Jedi Council tells him that the new Emperor has already required that the Jedi pledge their fealty to the new Emperor, and that the Jedi Council has refused. Obi-Wan tells them that they are putting themselves at risk by staying there, but he says that they can't do more good if they remain at the heart of the Empire. That the Jedi Council has remained unmenaced by treachery for 1,000 years. Windu says that this evidence must be presented before the Jedi Council to get them to approve of action against the new Empire. Obi-Wan questions whether the Jedi can oppose such a large force as the new Empire, but Windu says they have no choice. The longer they wait, the stronger it will become, and they yet have many allies within the Senate. Darth Vader takes on his new role of fighting against planets which are rebelling against the new Empire. He goes there, and it is the same one he had been on before. But this time the people are angered at him. A woman spits on him, and he tightens her throat. And he says that anyone who defies the Emperor will be considered an enemy of the Empire. He holds her, strangling her to death, until a child runs up calling to her mother. And then he is shaken out of his trance, and lets her fall. Then he walks off as the woman is helped back to her feet by villagers who curse him beneath their breaths. Anakin then proceeds to his ship, and tells AR to plot a course to Naboo. And on the planet he takes the helmets of the Commandos and Tyranus, and throws them into a pile on the burned remains of his former home. Turning and looking out over it now, the once green world is just a devastation of mud and gray, as the machines scour the surface for its mineral ores to feed the Empire. Then Anakin's mother appears to him again, but he tells her that now he is powerful enough to change things, that no longer must he sit by and allow things to happen as they will. Now he can make things the way they should be. She tells him to look at the planet, his former home, and he says that this is just temporary, but necessary to serve the cause of the Empire and assure its protection from insurgents and invasion. But he now has the favor of the Emperor, and powers he never knew he had before. Once they can put an end to the conflict which has stirred up in the galaxy, he will have the ability to make it over again. He can force people to act rightly. His mother is fading and tells him she will no longer be able to speak to him, and he moves towards her and she dissolves before him. Then there is a crack of thunder. He calls out loudly to her, and then collapses and sobs. And rain begins to pour over his head. Obi-Wan goes before the Jedi Council, and he and Windu show them the hologram, and say that this provides secure evidence that the entire war was merely designed to put Emperor Palpatine into power. And Obi-Wan still doesn't believe that the senator is a man of war and conflict, but they do say that his motives seem to have changed after the assassination attempt upon his life. And they tell him that they discovered that Senator Palpatine is also a Lord of the Sith. Obi-Wan questions the re-emergence of the Sith, and they tell him that they are certain, and that Tyranus was only the apprentice of Lord Sidious, although now they know that this Lord Sidious was Emperor Palpatine himself. They also tell Obi-Wan that there is a new disturbance in the Force, a dark Jedi named Darth Vader, who is acting in the Emperor's service. And they ask Obi-Wan if he would go on a secret mission to the Emperor's palace on Mustafar, and assassinate the Emperor and this Darth Vader. He is told to take a new name, and so that no longer will he be called Obi-Wan but Equal. They tell him that they cannot sanction such a thing, nor can they help him in this endeavor, and Obi-Wan says he understands. Obi-Wan asks if he can go after him with Anakin's aid, and they say that this is permissible to them. Meanwhile, on Mustafar, Palpatine tells Vader that the Jedi have turned against the Empire, and that one of them is bound to make an attempt to enter the citadel to get to him. And Vader pledges that he will defend him to the death. Iko Kenobi arrives at Mustafar in a Republic fighter, but is told to halt. He turns, and there is Dilithium. He is surprised and attempts to convince her that he is acting for the Republic, but she says the Republic is no more, that you are either for the Empire or against it. He tells her to look at the insignia on her uniform, and of her duty to the Republic, but she says that she now serves the Empire. She tells him that they received word about the Jedi Rebellion, and that he is under arrest. He tells her that he cannot permit her to stop him, and he walks forward, but she warns him to stop, or she will fire upon him, asking him to not force her to fire upon him. She activates an arm shield, ready to stand against him. He attempts to speak to her, and she says her only job is to arrest him, and he will not be harmed if he comes quietly. Then telling her she's never stood against a Jedi before. He activates his lightsaber, and approaches her. She tenses and fires, but he deflects the bolts, and one of them goes right back at her. She falls and Eco runs to her and lifts her, but she is already dead. He holds her body for a moment and cries out, then sets her back down, looking down at her, then standing up he moves on through willpower alone. Eco runs along the chasm to the central chamber, past thermal turbines, and beside the lava moat which runs around it to the bridge. He reaches the bridge and passes over it. But from behind a stanchion emerges a figure, Darth Vader wearing his war helmet. Eco recognizes him as Darth Vader, who then removes his helmet and Eco sees that behind it is Anakin. Eco sees him, and he asks Anakin what has convinced him to act for the Emperor. Vader says that he has been waiting for the Jedi to come against them, but he never knew it would be him. Eco attempts to convince Anakin that the Jedi are on the side of right, and that it is the Emperor who is the enemy, but Anakin does not believe it, saying he is sorry to find the Jedi turning traitor against the Empire. Eco tries to show him how he has been misled by the Emperor, and that it was Palpatine who was behind the entire war. That this was all a plan formed between Palpatine and Dooku to gain control of the Republic. Darth says where is his evidence for this, and he says that his droid QB has all the evidence for it, but he replies that he destroyed QB. Eco looks at him and is startled, asking him if he knew precisely why the Emperor ordered him to destroy a droid, and he replies it is because the Jedi Knights have turned against the Empire. Eco says the reason he wanted him to destroy the robot was because he contained the evidence that Palpatine was a traitor to the Republic, and Anakin says, as you're a traitor of the Empire, and Eco says, I stand for the values of the old Republic, not the new Empire. Anakin says, precisely, and steps forward. He says to Anakin that it is the Emperor who is the Sith Lord, that they must now go together, and only both of them can defeat the Emperor. But Anakin sees the Sith as giving him the means to expand his powers in the Force, and says no longer Anakin Skywalker but Darth Vader. Eco recognizes at that point his own failure, and says so be it, Darth Vader. But still asks him to stand aside, and permit him to pass, but he will not, prepared to defend the bridge to his death. Eco says he does not wish to kill him, that he has been like a brother to him. He says perhaps they once were brothers, and tells him that he ought to abandon the Jedi and join them. But he says he will never join the Brotherhood of the Sith, and they begin to sword fight upon the bridge. Vader tells Eco how much more powerful he has become in such a short time, but Eco says you are still just a beginner, Darth. They continue to clash weapons. Vader questions why he opposes him, given that he is achieving what the Jedi have always wished to obtain. Eco makes it clear that power is not the way to goodness. Vader draws upon the influence of the dark side that has been growing in him, increasing his power. The battle continues, with both gaining for a moment and then withdrawing, with neither able to gain the upper hand over the other. The contest becomes more fierce, and when Eco falls against the rail, Vader then slashes it, but Eco jumps back. Then as Vader begins to hack at the bridge supports and Eco feels the bridge beneath him weakening, he attempts to run back. But it buckles and collapses. Kenobi falls and his saber slides to the ledge. The bridge, however, then tips and falls, but Eco is able to save himself by grabbing onto some hanging cables. Vader looks down and sees him struggling, and attempts to use the Force to yank free the cables. But before they are fully released, the rest of the bridge gives way and tips to the side. Vader falls against the rail he had hacked, which gives way, causing him to fall. Vader plunges down, descending into the chasm. Eco cries out to him, and climbs up the hanging cable to the ledge, and then he looks down, calling to Anakin. Anakin has landed upon the bank, and Eco attempts to find a way across, but there is no way. He is lying upon the cape, but his arms and legs are already being consumed by flame, and he cries out in agony. Eco then watches flames leap up over Anakin's body. He picks up his lightsaber, but cannot bear to watch, and turns, going away. Eco goes to destroy the volcanic regulator, which will cause the entire fortress to be consumed in a volcanic eruption. Vader pulls himself away from the lava on his arms and legs, which are disintegrating from him as he moves, and rolls to extinguish the flames. Now the attractive young man has become an evil vision. He breathes in the hot sulfur gases, and it burns his lungs, as he calls to his master. Then Vader collapses and the Emperor arrives with a couple clone troopers, who drag him out and carry him back in a cart. He is scarcely alive, and initially when Anakin is revived he cannot get enough breath, and so is linked to a portable respirator. He is transported back to the Emperor's shuttle. Equal attempts to get back to his ship before the explosive goes off, and has to avoid the stationed clone troopers along the way. But the detonation goes off and this creates havoc, so he is unable to get back to his ship. He then sees the Emperor's shuttle launching and heads for this landing site. There he sees Anakin's ship, goes to it, and boards. He gets the ship off the landing platform, and away, just shortly before the entire Mustafar base is overwhelmed by spreading lava. He blasts from the planet and into space. And when AR asks about Anakin, he tells him that Anakin will not be coming back. The little droid seems sad, and Eco tells him that things will never be the same again. Vader lies in a medical center within the Emperor's ship, where he is operated on by droids. Vader is lying on the operating table, having trouble breathing, as a breath mask comes down over his face, and he rises up, taking his first breaths from the new respirator which gives him life. Equal goes to the Jedi Temple, and into the Jedi Council chamber, and tells them that the Emperor escaped the fortress on Mustafar prior to its destruction. They fear that the Emperor will begin to attack the Jedi, and he is asked to perform the function of transporting Master Yoda to a place of safety, and that the specific location will be left for them to decide. He says that he understands, and leaves Coruscant. Darth Vader is sent to the defiant Jedi Council to wipe them out. The Jedi Temple is attacked by the Empire's forces and Vader enters in with a squad of clone troopers. They enter the council chamber, where all the Jedi are sitting in a circle. Vader gives the command to his troops, that they be gunned down where they sit, but a wind fills the chamber, and all the troopers are held in a state of suspension, and unable to move. Vader is enraged, and moves forward himself, but each of them now rises, igniting his own blue lightsaber. Vader goes after the Jedi Knights who defend them, cutting them down. The wind intensifies and Vader is blown back, and the Jedi Council members flee from the room. Vader then communicates with the Emperor, telling him that many of the Jedi are dead but that several of them escaped. The Emperor then tells him that he will track them down, wherever they go. And then asks him concerning his son, saying that they will wish to keep him from him. And the Emperor tells him that he has sent a force of troopers to Kashyyyk to prevent any babies from leaving until his arrival. After completing his mission for the Jedi Council, Ekel arrives on Kashyyyk to the medical center, and finds Bay there with TT. He asks about Padme and they say that they are waiting now, and speak together about what is happening across the galaxy. Bail informs him of the attack upon the Jedi Temple, and that it is no longer a Jedi stronghold. He asks, and he speaks to him of the devastation of the Jedi. When they hear that Padme has given birth, Ekel enters. There is a medical droid there and Padme, with her two children, Luke and Leia. Bail comes in and Drew and Owen also arrive there. Ekel looks at the two babies and Padme is smiling, and quite happy, and he takes one of them. Then he gives it back to Padme, and she asks about Anakin, saying he would not be able to wait to see them. Ekel looks away, and then Padme asks if something is wrong. Ekel thinks for a moment and then says to Padme that Anakin got into a battle and was overcome by a dark Jedi named Darth Vader. They fought together on Mustafar, but Vader prevailed over him, saying he is sorry. She is overcome and cries, and Ekel takes the children from her and passes them on to the medical droid. Then Ekel goes to the medical droid and asks if the births have been recorded yet, and she says they have not. Ekel says that he will fill out the record sheet. He looks up at Padme and enters on it only the birth of Luke Skywalker, and then walks it to the medical desk, and hands it over to them. Ekel is walking through the halls of the medical wing, when he sees clone troopers standing guard outside the building, and patrolling through the halls. Ekel returns casually to Padme's room, telling her that he has taken care of everything and that she is all ready to leave, and when the medical droid exits he tells her there are clone troopers at the exit. Padme asks why soldiers would be guarding a medical center, then thinks, and says, because of her babies. But she asks why? Because they are Anakin's children, and he nods, saying Darth Vader wants them. Ekel says it could be for some other reason. Bail enters telling them that the clone troopers are not permitting any babies to leave the building, and they have placed scanning stations at all exits. Bay says that TT is keeping an eye on them. When they ask what is going on, then tells Bay, Owen, and Drew that Darth Vader is Anakin, and they tell him he said that Anakin was dead, and he says he didn't wish to hurt Padme more, to keep a happier memory of Anakin in her mind. The clone troopers are restraining people who have newborns and having them returned to the medical wing. Bail gets word from TT that the entire medical center is surrounded and that no one is being allowed to enter or leave the building without being checked. Eco then goes to Drew and Owen and asks them to enter, and Padme is still in shock, and then Eco goes up to Padme and tells her she has to say goodbye. And she asks what he means, and he says that she and the children cannot remain here now, and for safety they must be divided up. Padme asks if there isn't another way, and Eco says that he will be coming after Luke. She attempts to say goodbye to Luke and says she will see him soon. Then Eco takes him and places him into a bag which Drew places around her neck. Then they outfit her to look like she is pregnant. Then he says that another couple are on their way, and that they will be arriving at Padme's room shortly. He takes a case, telling her that they use these to transport radiation cells for their radiation chamber on the ground floor. But he removes what is in the interior to make enough room for Leia. Padme asks if they have to transport her out in that, and Eco says they wouldn't open it. Padme asks how long she would have, and he says that he can give her an air cylinder which should last about 10 minutes, 15 at the most, but enough time to get her to the lobby to meet up with the couple. He looks out the window and sees increasing security gathering around the doors. Then Eco sends his signal to Bay, telling him to prepare his ship for launch, and that they will meet him there. He tells them that every craft is being searched, and they are setting up scanning stations before anyone can board. He tells Bay to wait there. He has to get Drew and Owen out first, then he will come back for the others. Eco then tells Padme to wait there with Leia and to get herself dressed. Eco tells them to leave their bags behind so they won't need to be checked at the exit, so they leave them in the room. Vader then arrives in a troop carrier with his own soldiers and begins the process of taking command of the force there. With a squad of troops behind him, he then makes his way into the medical center. Eco leads Drew and Owen down and they go to one of the shuttle stations. But one of the soldiers halts them and checks them. Then he hears a baby sound and asks them to return, but Eco suggests to him that there was nothing to be found on them, that they are clear and can go on. The trooper says to them, "You are clear, you can go on," and they leave. Then Eco enters and sees Darth Vader has entered the building. He hangs back and isn't sure how to get past him, as troopers are now entering the medical wing for a search. They are collecting information, and they are directed off, and Eco sends a transmission to Padme telling her that Darth Vader is on his way, and she must leave the room at once. He tells her to get Leia in the box, and get down to the lobby as soon as she can. Padme looks frantic, and takes Leia, and places the air cylinder in her mouth, and kisses her, and places her within the case, and locks it closed. She then exits the room. Padme goes down to where she's supposed to meet the couple, and finds the clone troopers have restrained them, and are questioning them. Padme watches. The man is arguing that his wife is about to give birth, and they must get her into that wing, but the clone troopers tell him that wing is sealed off. Then the man says he's going to take out something for them to see, and then distracts the troopers, as he takes out a concealed blaster and shoots one of the clone troopers, telling his wife to run. But the other trooper raises up his gun and shoots the man, who falls down screaming. Then he turns and shoots the woman down too, who cries out as she collapses. They both lie dead on the floor, and Padme is terrified, but goes in the other direction, while the onlookers are crying out in horror. She hears stop and turns, and they are speaking to someone going the other way. She goes on, and at every exit there are clone troopers. She then reaches the door to the radiation room. One of the clone troopers at an exit points to her, and so she goes inside. Someone attempts to enter, and she looks out the door, and there is a clone trooper there, and asks about her, and she says she's waiting for her partner. Then she closes the door and locks it. Then the clone trooper attempts to get inside the room, and she goes to find a radiation suit but finds they are locked up. She can hear them attempting to gain entry. She can find no other way out but sees an emergency exit in the radiation room that indicates lethal doses of radiation from exposure to the reactor core, and she goes to the door and hesitates, looking at the case, then goes through the radiation room as fast as she can and gets out. She comes out on the surface of the landing area. She attempts to locate the ship of Bail Organa, but there is a scanning checkpoint. Padme makes her way there, and is found by Mondia, who is with TT, who takes her to a place to change. They go inside and Padme quickly takes out Leia and opens her box, and her eyes are closed. She cries out to Leia and touches her, and the child opens its eyes, and she takes her up weeping and laughing, saying that she was only sleeping. Padme and Mondia then change into their robes, and she tells Padme that she will go first, then TT. She tells her, while they are distracted by TT, I will drop my case towards you, and you will exchange yours for mine. It seems risky, but she assures her they have no choice. Padme commates Leia to her carry bag with a breath tube, and closes it up again. Mondia hands to her forged official papers. They approach the checkpoint and Mondia hands over her case, and it is scanned by them, with nothing found within. This is passed back to her, and she is allowed to go through, while TT is halted as they investigate her radiation case. Mondia then drops her case and Padme walks up to it, but a clone trooper swings around, telling her to get back. Padme says she's just picking up her bag, and he tells her to get back, or he'll fire. Padme withdraws as they tell TT to step aside, and then ask for Padme's bag. She looks over at Mondia, who is looking with hopeless eyes. Padme looks down at the fallen bag, then at her own. The clone trooper asks her to approach a second time, and then TT races through the checkpoint. The clone trooper looks over and the commander instructs one of them to fire, and he fires his rifle. In an instant TT explodes in 2 pieces. Padme cries out, and the clone trooper turns on her. He asks if that was their droid, and Mondia says it wasn't. He asks what's wrong with her, and Mondia says that her mother just died. The clone trooper then takes Padme's bag and scans it, then takes up the fallen case and hands it back to Mondia. Padme's bag is cleared and handed back to her, and she is permitted to pass through. She meets with Mondia, and they continue on together, walking slowly to the ship. Padme looks over and sees the smoking remains of TT scattered over the platform and attempts to hold back her tears. They board the shuttle and Bail tells them to not take Leia out until they are cleared for launch. A couple of troopers move nearer to the ship, but then walk off seemingly concerned about something else. They are given clearance to launch, and they acknowledge, and the pilots launch the ship. They take off and Padme suddenly shouts out for Anakin. Mondia asks her, and she replies that she felt Anakin's presence within her mind. She tells Padme that Anakin would have joined the Force when he died, and would always be with her. Padme looks down and sees the figure of Vader arriving, and looking at their shuttle from the landing site. She takes up Leia and looks into her eyes, telling her that everything would be alright now. Padme then looks over and asks Mondia if she will be remaining with them on Alderaan, and she says for a short while, but she wishes to do what she can to help fight against the Empire. Bail comes back to them and tells them that they are free and clear now, and says that TT sacrificed herself so that they could get away, and now they are all safe, and he puts his hand on Padme's shoulder. Mondia glances at them as Bail tells Padme everything will be alright. He goes off and Padme looks out the window at the clouds, but is overcome with emotion, realizing that through her actions to save Leia, that the effects of the radiation will someday bring about her own death. Goes to leave off Drew and Owen at a shuttle, about to leave for another planet, telling them not to go directly, but to make several stops along the way to blur their trail. But Owen is somewhat bitter about this and tells Eagle that he is the one who brought this down upon their family. Drew attempts to calm him, but Owen tells Eagle to never come near their family again. And after a muted farewell from Brew, who carries Luke, Eagle walks back, and then watches as the ship launches and goes aloft on its way to the stars.